Hey everyone, welcome to the Noor Podcast. We are a talk show style podcast based in Lot 14 in Adelaide, and we are just a storytelling platform where we want to uncover people's masks that they put on in daily life. Come listen to us as we delve down into the stories of everyday people and talk about the accomplishments that they've had in their life. Let me introduce you to today's guest.
Hi, so I'm Simon. Today we're going to be chatting about some of my experiences growing up in South Africa, my early childhood, working in the film industry and what that was like, and some of the projects that I worked on. Pivoting from there, moving into a sales and marketing position, and then from there moving into managing directing and how that transition worked and some of the lessons that were learned over that 20-year period. And then coming to Adelaide and some of my experiences here. So yeah, hope you enjoy it.
So can you please, we'll start off with just going a bit about introducing yourself to the audience and talk about where you were born and where you came from. So.
Cool. So yeah, I was born in 79, which when I say it feels like a long time ago. I guess probably to you it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Or is a long time ago. So yeah, born in Cape Town, which is in South Africa. Absolutely beautiful place, naturally so beautiful. And I guess I was born middle class for South Africa, probably upper middle class family. Grew up in, so when I was first born, I think we traveled around a bit, but I didn't really remember that. My first sort of memories are from living in the house that I grew up in. And it was a beautiful big old place, big garden, lots of trees. I remember loads of trees. Yeah, we sort of found ourselves in a place where, as South Africa was changing from what was the national government to a government of unity and then to a democracy, we found ourselves in an area which sort of was changing with that environment, which was quite interesting to see and observe over the years. But yeah, really happy as a place to live. It was great. My mother had a little play school, so I guess I had a very traditional family in that normal mother, father. I had an older brother, a younger sister. My dad comes from a big Lebanese family, so 6 brothers and sisters. So lots of family gatherings and very loud Middle Eastern talking over one another type environment. But very fond memories of that. My mom's parents were from the UK, and they were very involved in our lives as well, both amazing characters and very strong in their own way. So yeah, my mother was a play school teacher, so she had a little play school on the side of the house, and it was a big property. So we had chickens and ducks and dogs and big swimming pool, and just a fantastic place to be as a kid. And through that, she was quite interested in sort of the Rudolf Steiner thoughts around education. So my brother and I went to a Waldorf school for our sort of very early schooling. And I know sort of as a young adult, I joked about it having like beanbag as a subject. And, but actually now that I look back on it with a little bit more time behind me, it was a magic place to be a kid. They really, when I think back, I just think colors and I think stories and I just, from a young age had a passion for storytelling and listening to stories and as an environment, I think it really helped us to find the magic in the world. And that's a great skill, I think, in general, to be able to look for the good and the beauty and the magic around you. So that was an interesting education initially. For a number of reasons, I then moved to a Marist Brothers school. So it was a traditional Catholic run school. That was more sort of in the southern suburbs, so the more sort of affluent areas. In fact, it was directly opposite what I think is the most expensive boys' school in Cape Town. So it was a slightly different environment. Traditional we still had brothers. So the brothers that were running the school to a degree, they were really old and didn't really do much, but they were around. That was very interesting. So St. Joseph's was one of the first schools to sort of open itself to multiracial integration in South Africa. So obviously, I guess context is important, but then perspective of context is also really important. So one of the things I've noticed being in Australia particularly is when I've traveled before, people would try and gauge your accent and sort of, are you from the UK or where are you from? Whereas here people, for the most part, know that I'm from South Africa. So mostly they'll tell me where I'm from rather than me having to explain. And there is a certain perception of context around those discussions. So I assume because there are a lot of South Africans here, and potentially the reasons that a lot of those South Africans came here are not the reasons that my family and I came here. So there is a sort of a negative perception about the context of growing up in South Africa around that time. And for me, that wasn't the case at all. So, I had the privilege of going to a school like St. Joseph's, which was, for South Africa was a good education on average for sure. Certainly not the best, but it was a good education. But we had the privilege of dealing with people from different religions, different social economic backgrounds. And it taught me a lot of really good social skills in terms of how to interface with different people at different levels, which became really valuable in my sort of later working life as well. St. Joseph, I sort of, when I'm thinking back now on my childhood, it's sort of those earlier years, I feel like I spent a lot of time climbing trees and daydreaming. In fact, I think I'm not sure if I had experiences maybe that sort of tall poppy syndrome, which we were warned about when we came here actually, was potentially at play. I know there were certain instances where maybe I'd done pretty well at something and there were actually repercussions that weren't positive, they were negative, and perhaps I associated that. So I really just tried to stay very average in everything I did. Got pushed into a leadership role at the school. So for some reason I was voted in as head boy. I didn't enjoy it at all. I was probably a pretty naughty kid. Naughty is the wrong word, but I was mischievous. I just didn't like having that extra pressure on me at that point in my life, to be honest. But it was interesting because, that storytelling and that sort of the way in which I gravitated towards that, I think was a big driver towards moving towards the film industry and wanting to be able to tell stories in that way, in such a beautiful live medium. So they were enjoyable years. My younger years were really enjoyable. For high school, I went to a really great school, beautiful, just under Table Mountain. So you've got sort of the southern suburb side of Table Mountain, which is quite green. So you get the afternoon shadow of the mountain on the area. It's foresty. And the school was just right at the foot of the mountain. Absolutely beautiful place and really, really engaged teachers, a high level of performance from the students, and really well-rounded in terms of, culture, academic, sport. And I just loved my time there. Made lifelong friends, guys I'm still friends with and talk to every week. So from there, I think I started to really think about what I might want to do as a career, and I knew I didn't want to do something that involved sitting in an office all day. I didn't even own a computer until sort of, the first time I started working on a computer was in high school. Not because they weren't around, just, my family didn't really have one and I wasn't really interested and I'd rather be doing something outdoors. But started to do, so I had an art project which I was offered some media center time and decided I wanted to do a sort of a snapshot of the area that I lived in. And as I said, the social impact of some of the changes that started to happen within that area. So things that we hadn't really seen as a younger kid were starting to happen as an older teen. Things like, homelessness on the streets, and I just documented that. So, just had an old video camera and went around and started documenting some of the good, some of the bad, not trying to really say anything, just documenting it, and really enjoyed that. So around that time, it must have been 97 that I finished school. I'd been really involved in drama as well. So from quite a young child, I'd been enrolled in a couple of performances, and then at high school got really involved in the drama that we put on. Again, I was pretty average at it, but really enjoyed it. So applied for psychology at UCT, the University of Cape Town.
Yeah.
I did actually get in, but for a number of reasons didn't take that position, and went straight in to try and find work in the film industry.
Yeah.
I started working for a production company. So I managed to get I think it was through my father, I managed to get a meeting with a producer who was working on mostly commercials, and mostly for European markets, so London, Germany. When they come over to South Africa with rands, we've got beautiful daylight hours, and we've got beautiful scenery and very diverse scenery. So you've got the sort of the bushes we were talking about earlier, but you also have wine farms that you could be in the middle of France when you visit them, beaches that very varied and diverse beaches. So it's just a beautiful place for filming, and your money definitely goes a lot further in South Africa than it would if they were filming back home. So started working with him, so I think I did about 300 commercials all in all.
Oh, wow.
And from there worked in about 7 feature films through the course of my film career.
Was that in an acting capacity, or was that more of like product?
No, not at all in acting. I did some stuff in front of the camera, and again didn't really enjoy it terribly much. I really enjoyed the idea of being able to tell a story. For me, that was the magic. Yeah. And I had it in my head that I needed to understand each aspect or main aspect of the industry in order to be able to become a good director. At the time, I thought if I knew how to run production, and I knew how to work a camera, and I knew how to do the lighting, I would probably come from a better position when telling people how to do their jobs, because that's kind of how I thought leadership worked. Now I know it was a very bad approach to take, but it did give me a lot of different experience. So working in, at a very young age, still in my teen years, these productions would hire me vehicles, they'd put me up in really good accommodation. I traveled all over, got to travel to Mauritius and places like Namibia, and I was working on multi-million-dollar projects at a really young age. So I didn't love production. I enjoyed thinking about what we were going to produce and being involved in it, but I've never been driven by the financial side of business. I far prefer the operational side of things. So I dabbled in that for the first couple of years, worked my way up to production manager, and then decided I wanted to do something different. And the logical step for me was so back when I worked in film, it really was still film. So we worked with 35, 16 mil film. So you had to load these big magazines with the film and then thread it through the gate, and still had to check for hairs and all the rest of it. So it was the digital era was sort of coming, but it wasn't there yet. So what they did with most of the cameras is they would, as the film passed through the gate, there was a spinning mechanism which had a mirror on it, and that mirror would then send the image that you were capturing on the film through the lens to a digital camera that you could then take a look at live on set. And obviously you could record that and you could play that back and you could see, did I get the shot? Did we not get the shot?
Yeah.
And I thought that was the best place to sit to hear the director, because you were always on set. They never, if it was a closed set, you were there. And you were sitting literally next to the director, and he would often engage with you and let's see that again. And you could hear where he was going and what he was happy with and why he was happy. So I did that for quite a while. I worked with a company called Cine Licht. I don't know if they still exist. On producing what we call the yellow box. So that was a sort of the first digital on-set editing tool. So we could do basic capture, and then from that we could green screen. We could do, if you wanted to do a composite, we could also do overlays. So if you had fast and slow motion and you were trying to marry the two together. And that was quite fun to work on a project like that. And to see it kind of come to fruition. And it was an incredibly useful tool for its time. And then I made the call that I wanted to get into camera. And that was probably where I was happiest. So I worked with a cameraman who did a lot of aerial photography. In fact, I think he was probably just the guy that did all the crazy stuff. So working with him, we got to do some really fun stuff. Probably my fondest memory was with him. We were filming a German movie on a guy who he flew a glider right through Africa, and it's a true story. And
the whole of Africa.
Yeah, so that was his goal, was to fly from the tip of Africa to Egypt. But he crashed along the way, and this was ages ago. And his daughter backtracked his journey to try and find what happened to him, because they never heard of, back then things were very different. And we got to shoot a glider basically gliding through the Fish River Canyon. So on the border of South Africa and Namibia is the Fish River Canyon, which is kind of like the Great Canyon, only smaller. And it was beautiful sunset light, and this glider was in front of us, and we were in the helicopter. And as you come around the corners, the air changes, and this glider would sort of pop and drop. And we were sitting, I remember the pilot was a guy called Gert Ace, who was an absolute bullet. And it was like he was married to this glider. And, it's hard to paint the picture, but the sun setting and this beautiful orange yellow light, just sort of the freedom of it all was awesome for a young person to be able to experience that sort of thing. So that was sort of my film career. I probably by about the 5th year, so when I was very entrenched in camera then, I met my wife. So my folks had immigrated to the US, and I was living with some mates in a digs. They were all still studying, most of my friends. And in walked this very special looking young lady. Turned out she was actually dating a guy I knew, so there wasn't much prospect then. But she went off to London to go and do some work, and came back single. And very quickly we started dating, and it became quite serious quite quickly. And going from somebody who had expected and assumed that my life would be film for the rest of my life and everything that comes with that, which is not family life. It's not security. It's very much an independent person. You're married to the industry. You're only as good as the last job that you did, and you don't want to have a last job. So it got to the point where my agent wouldn't even phone me anymore. They'd just book me on jobs, and it was great. And when you did get time off, you could enjoy it, but you could never really plan anything, because the shoot takes as long as the director or the DOP or whomever's working on the shot needs in order to get it. So very often she would be going to a party on her own, or she'd be going to her family, or there's an event or something special that you miss because you're working. And I'd accepted that because I loved what I was doing. But I guess one of the things I'm doing now is working with businesses, helping coach smaller businesses into, coach both the leadership and the business as a whole to understand what it is that they do. So what is your mission statement? What is your vision? From there, you've got your values that you kind of wrap your business around, and the strategy gets you from where you are to where you want to be.
Yeah.
And I guess as a human or as a person, those same basic rules, and they're basic, lots of businesses just don't apply them, but they're very simple. The same can be said for life. And I guess for me, that stage in my life, I started to be a little bit more self-aware about perhaps where I wanted to be in 20 years rather than just living for the moment as I had before. Perhaps my perspective on wanting to get married and having a family changed because I just met somebody that I wanted to be with. So I carried on in the film industry. I still loved it. We still made it work. We bought a little place out in Muizenberg, which is this beautiful sort of surfers paradise. Again, I was doing loads of work away. But during that period, I had a couple of unpleasant things happening on site that sort of made me question whether it was all worth it, just from a work perspective as well. There was some serious injuries on one of the projects that I worked on. I worked on Flight of the Phoenix, which was in Namibia, and I was away for quite a long time. But we were shooting the crash sequence where the airplane crashes into the dunes and sort of crashes down. And we were preparing the shot, and it probably wasn't the best idea. But to be fair, the stunt coordinator was very clear. We had sort of a dolly track with which the airplane was going to be mounted on. And as the airplane came through, there was a massive crane. The crane had a pyro that would drop, and that would then pull the airplane. It would hit the dune, and sort of we would get the shot. But we didn't want to break the airplane or the model of the airplane initially. So what they decided to do was to get a filing cabinet and put some plyboard on the end to indicate the wings and just test that the mechanisms were working. And they did. They explained it really clearly. Obviously, it did that because it's not an airplane. It doesn't have the aerodynamics to fly. So the DOP, it's not even nice to talk about this, but the DOP decided he would put the camera where it had landed because he wanted to get that sand spraying up and everything. And they came over to him and said, "This is not a good idea." To the point where they actually put a bullseye on the tripod that he was working on. So the pyro went off. I was inside a container, so a big shipping container that we'd cut out. I was inside that to give you an idea of the lengths that the team had gone to try and keep everybody safe. But he had his own mind up made, and unfortunately it flew right into him, took his legs off in really the middle of nowhere. Listening to that for hours when you can do nothing is not a pleasant experience. And there were some other experiences that happened that sort of just started to change my perception of wanting to be involved in it. I also, the film industry, particularly in Cape Town, was very small and very niche, but they were very, very professional. And it was hard to break in. So as a fairly cocky young man, they made it quite hard for me initially. But once you got into that sort of inner circle, it was probably a little bit like a dysfunctional family, in that you got to know these people really well. You spent a lot of time with them. And a lot of the older guys, so probably sort of my age now, within that last year that I worked in film, I think there were 3 guys who ended up committing suicide. And that was where I really sort of just questioned, do I want to be like that when I'm older? And you start adding up not being around for your kids, not having those stable relationships, not necessarily even potentially being engaged, because it's really fun and shiny when you start. And it is an awesome career. And, there are lots of people who are able to make the right compromises and able to make it work and have a great life doing it. I just wasn't sure that I was going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I put out to some people that I was sort of looking to maybe do something different. And I, for the first time, I think I started getting quite clear about what I wanted. So I knew that I wanted to do something that was sort of 9 to 5. I knew that I still didn't want something that was office-based. And by that, I mean, I didn't want to sit at a desk all day. And one of my mates, one of my very close mates actually, had been contacted by some friends of ours. They were these crazy climbers, and they had a little business that was mostly just installing Christmas decorations in big shopping centres.
Yep.
And I think that was their real cash cow. That kind of that's what they did. That was the job. And there was maybe 4 or 5 employees.
Yep.
Very small company, but they were looking for somebody to come in and help them with their sort of come to market branding and sales and marketing and so on. The way that it used to work in Cape Town is you had film season in the summer where you could do commercials, and commercials were by far the better way to make money in Cape Town. So I would just do those 24/7, to the point where I think the first accident I ever had in a car, actually probably one of the only, was after working like 48 hours straight on a commercial and then going straight into another commercial. And the way it works is if your shoot delays the next shoot, you pay turnaround time for that technician on the next. So I earned in like 4 days probably what my mates who'd been to university were earning in like 2 months.
Yeah.
But I did drive into the back of a nun. So I just fell asleep.
Yeah.
It was traffic. It wasn't a bad accident, but just to give you an idea of sort of how hard one would work over that period. But then you would have winter where everything slowed down and all the European market went back to Europe for their summer. And then that's when we would do features generally. Yeah. So that year I opted not to do a feature and just give it a try. So I met the owner of the company, had a coffee with him, and literally he just offered me the job straight off the coffee. And it was cool because they knew they had something special. They just weren't quite sure how to package it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that they were even confident enough to go to the clients to say, we've got something that can solve your problems.
Yeah.
Because rope access back then was not mainstream at all. It was, it was really considered to be a very dangerous way to do things. It was for crazy rock climbers. And I think that was probably one of the big challenges. So we had a competitor who was just ahead of us in the market. And he was a branding genius, and he was very, very dynamic. He didn't conduct his business in a very ethical way, which slow and steady seemed to have, in the long run, been a far better model for us to have adopted, and I'm glad we did. But he sort of paved the way for us in a little bit in terms of that acceptance of saying, all right, scaffolding costs X or Y, but rope access is half the price, just as quick, and the guys can get the job done just as well. So there was the marketing and the sales side of it, which I found quite easy to do and really enjoyed. But then there was the branding perception side of things as well, which we needed to change. So we came up with our tagline, which was professional rope access. And I went from rocking up in board shorts and a t-shirt to dressing quite smartly so that people started to associate it with more of a mainstream business. We branded our vehicles, and we started looking at the various different applications that we could use it within. The obvious ones to us were just window cleaning, so really simple building maintenance. But then we started to upskill our teams in things like concrete repair work, painting of tall high-rise buildings, and then from there we got into more complex engineering. So working with engineers to really understand buildings, how they work, working with a lot of glass facade companies, big construction companies on bigger projects.
Yep.
And once we did that and we started to invest in the staff, and again, we didn't have, so I had not had any formal studying. None of us really were exceptionally clued up. We had the owner, Martin, who was very active in EO. And he would come in and he would sort of, okay, we need to get a mission statement and we need to get a vision and we need the strategy. And for the most part, a lot of us would just let it go over our head because we were just, if we're not doing something that makes money or that grows the business, it's just fluff and we don't need it. Again, now that I've got a couple of years behind me, I realize how important those things are. To more than just company culture, but to the success of an organization. He was really good in giving us as much leadership as he could from the front. We were all young. Retrospectively, had we had a business coach or someone who's doing what I'm doing now, I think it would have been a very different experience for us. But some of those lessons you just have to learn, right? You have to do the wrong thing until you find the right thing, and sometimes it's luck and sometimes it's strategy. So we started growing quite nicely as we started to figure out that we could do these other services, and people started to see us and accept us, and that was sort of when the penny dropped about becoming a brand in South Africa. So I remember writing down some objectives, and one of the objectives was that when I pull my car up, my car was always hugely branded with SkySight. When I pull the car up into, so in South Africa, you don't fill your car with petrol. You pull into a fuel station and there's someone ready waiting for you, and they do it all for you, and then you give them some change, and that's how they make money. So I had it in my head that when I pulled into a petrol station and somebody recognized the vehicle and could tell me what it was, what the branding was, that was kind of when we had got it right. And it did happen quite a bit later on, but it did, and it got to the point where, people would know we're the guys in yellow hanging off the building. And we did a whole rebrand as well, which was quite important, and I'll touch on that as well. But we started to grow. We started to get these different services that we were doing. Around 2008, I think it was. So in between that, my wife and I got married. Started having our children as well, and definitely sort of those would be the three best days of my life: was marriage, my son, and my daughter. Within the chaos of really trying to get a business going, we moved house to an area, a suburb where my folks had moved back, and they were in Pinelands. So we moved there. Pauline's, my wife's parents, were also there. So it was just really convenient for babysitting and all the rest of it. So 2008, we knew, so we had grown to a point where we were fairly well recognized within the industry. And we knew that the football stadiums were coming for the FIFA World Cup in South Africa in 2010. And that was when we sort of shifted a gear and we really went out and started marketing, finding out who was involved. I had a mate who was working at one of the engineering companies and chatted to him, and he gave me some contacts, and managed to get in touch with one of the German companies who'd been contracted to do all the roof membrane systems. And from that, we got work in Cape Town on the new stadium there. We got work in Durban on their stadium and in Port Elizabeth. So we really grew from a fairly small business to a staggeringly large amount of employees all dangling from high structures. And we really, that was, I think, the moment where we realized we could turn this into something great. Two of the partners, within that period, I'd been offered a dividend buy-in, which was really great, and showed the values of the people that I was working with in management. So there were four of us, and they recognized hard work and rewarded it, and that was great. So I was a partner. I had shareholding, pretty good shareholding in the company, and a really good profit share in the company as well. And at that point, two of our directors went full blast into managing these projects because they were remote. One was very much on site, and the other was very much managing the whole process, and that took him out of the core of the business. I was brought on for sales and marketing, but really one of the things I realized quite early on is that I had to take on the operational side of things. Not necessarily in terms of day-to-day implementation, but if I knew that if we weren't delivering a product that was quality, it didn't matter how good our marketing was, we were not going to have successful sales that were meaningful and sustainable. So we really looked at systems. We looked at implementing good systems. We had ISO implemented, and we started to understand that businesses need to be, there's a difference between a business that's people orientated and system driven. And we wanted to be more of a system driven business so that, within the industry that we worked, being rope access, you could earn a fairly decent, and it was one of the things I loved about the job actually, was that guys who came with really limited education and probably from limited means, if they worked hard and they were smart, they were able to create really good careers for themselves that they could really change their lives through. And it was, on those days where it was really hard, that would be one of the motivating factors for me that would keep me going. So we managed to get the stadiums done fairly successfully. And from the money that we made from that, we'd always had this goal of getting into the oil and gas industry, because a lot of our staff would get poached to the oil and gas industry, and they would get paid maybe 20 times what they would be earning. So maybe they would work for a couple of weeks and then they'd be without work again. They would still take the risk because it was money in the pocket that was easier for them. And they all aspired to that as a career because, it was just where they could really change their lives. So we had always battled with this. And again, it was one of the reasons why we really made that decision to say we can't be people-based, we need to be systems-based. And through those systems, we started putting in place a mechanism to make sure that if we lost a team leader, there was somebody who was already training underneath him who could then replace him. And we started really focusing on the human side of things. And, it doesn't matter whether it's personal or whether it's business, having empathy and having an understanding of the human factor or the human impact in what you do not only drives you better, but it also allows you to be better at what you do. And we found that out. And again, that was a steep learning curve. So a lot of the leaders in the building industry were pretty tough guys in South Africa, and they still are. And a lot of the leadership style was very aggressive. So, you're not a leader unless you scream and shout at your staff. And we tried some of that. It really didn't work. Again, with some time behind me, I realized people, you don't have to like somebody you respect, but given enough time, you probably will end up liking them. And somebody you like or you don't respect, given enough time, you'll probably end up not liking them as much as you thought you did. So we tried to bring that into the way in which we engaged with our staff, and it wasn't easy because for a number of reasons, whether it was the way the supervisors were used to treating staff or whether it was the way that we engaged with people. So we really had to change that culture within the company. And again, it was one of the things that I think led to the success of the company was that we created an environment which was, my partners to me were like family. So when I left there, it was difficult. So my two partners who had worked on the stadiums, they went off to sort of really work hard on the oil and gas side of things, and I was then sort of given the sort of managing director role of the company, it was a very, very difficult time. So that must have been around 2010, 11-ish. I'd had a surfing injury and I'd damaged my back a bit, but with the loss of those skills, I was generally out on sites or quoting the whole day. And then I'd come home, bath the kids, try and spend some time with them, have some supper, and then the laptop would come out and I'd sit and work till 2, 3 in the morning or whatever was needed to get my administration done. I think still back then, it's all a bit blurry after 20 years, but back then I also probably had not learned how to lead properly. Because as the business had grown exponentially, I just tried to take more on rather than to delegate. And from that, I wouldn't say I burnt out, but my back got so bad that I would not sleep. My health obviously took a massive knock. I remember clearly we had wooden floors, and I couldn't sleep on the bed because if my wife turned, it would feel like someone was sticking a knife in my back. And I knew something had to give. And that was when I think I really truly started to learn how to lead a company and what works and what doesn't. And again, like, I can't take credit because we were very much a team. So the four of us, we learned very hard on one another. So we had someone who, our financial director, and she was really, really strong in that, and many other things as well. And then we had our sort of rope access specialist who we trusted one another that you had your base covered. And again, we respected one another, which made it a really, even though it was very difficult, it made it a nice environment to work in. So from that, we started hiring in positions. So we started getting really clear again about these systems and the positions that we needed and who we needed to fill. And that was a challenge because you bring people in and you're sort of building it on the runway as you go. And you don't always know what you need. And sometimes it takes refining and sometimes you got the wrong person, which we had a few times. But it just kept getting refined and we kept working at it and we kept sort of looking at it going, what can we do better? We had a very good cadence for meeting, and our meetings were really good at reviewing things. And we were doing a lot of things that now that, I'm working in coaching with businesses, these are structured things that again are really simple to apply. But if you do them and you follow these things properly, whether it's in your personal life or with your business, the results tend to be good. I hear people talk about things like, being able to imagine where you want to be, and you say it 100 times and it comes true because you've sort of, you've thought it into reality. And I don't subscribe to that at all. I think really what it is if you're clear about who you are, and so in a company that would be your mission statement. If you're clear about your values, those don't change whether you're human or a business. And you're clear about where you want to get to, suddenly it just makes everything a lot more achievable, because when the opportunities arise that are to take them because you already know what you need. And it's been a great pleasure for me working with smaller companies here in Adelaide to be able to help them with these systems. And you don't do anything more than just implement the systems with them and to see them take it, run with it, and to see that engagement. And that was kind of where we got to as a company. We started seeing that engagement into the projects we were working on, the buy-in from the staff. Guys didn't want to let each other down, so the work ethic was really good. And like any business, there were ongoing issues. It wasn't perfect. When I started to think about potentially moving on, it was a fairly quick decision. So, my wife had for a while wanted to maybe try something a little different. As we discussed, living in South Africa is interesting. I absolutely love the place. I love the people. There are some staggering statistics around things like rape and violence there that I'm not wanting to steer away from. But the reality is that the bulk of the people there are good, hardworking, beautiful people, it for me it was quite hard to even consider leaving the country I'd sort of grown up in. But I also realized that I'd sort of reached a level where I wasn't needed in the company as much as I felt always useful, or perhaps even I wasn't being challenged as much as I felt I needed to be in order to stay sharp.
Yep.
So during COVID, we sort of started looking at, what are the other options. So COVID was quite rough, because you've got a lot of guys who work for you. So, we had literally hundreds of guys, and we had to make sure they could eat and their families could eat. And I was lucky in that we were working on a really big project, and we were able to continue working on that project because South Africa shut down. Literally the one day driving into the project, I drove all the way around the mountain and I did not see a single person. It was like the apocalypse. It was so strange. And we had to, the police they were running around arresting people for going surfing and crazy stuff like that. But to me, it made sense to shut the country down for a while. It made sense that they wanted to stop selling alcohol in certain instances to me, because the rate of alcohol injuries to hospital time, and they needed those beds.
Yep.
And to prepare for the waves that came, it made sense. But the continuous lockdown for as long as it was massive economic drain on the country, and obviously made work quite difficult for business owners. But we managed to kind of tick on with this project, and that sort of kept the wheels turning, and we were able to through some of the funds through government, we were able to get some of our staff some money through that as well.
Yeah.
So when the decision sort of came to move, it was a very difficult one. You spend close on 20 years of your life building something with people who are like family, and to let go is hard. And while you're doing that, you also have to negotiate with these people what the value of your asset is that you've helped them build. And I'm very proud to say that, we were able to get through all of that, and I still very much think of them as friends. We have still a good relationship where, we talk to one another every now and again, and there's no hard blood there. And I think that again goes to, being able to negotiate things in a way that is mutually beneficial, and from being able to work with like-minded people who have a similar value system to you. You're able to work through things in a different way to people who don't. And that, I was asked for advice, and I think that would probably be one of the biggest things for me, is to be very clear about who you are, as we've discussed, and from that, your values, and from that, who you choose to spend time with in a personal capacity, but also who you choose to work with. You can't always choose, and sometimes you have to compromise. But certainly if you're getting into owning, managing, running a business, or being part of a leadership team within a business, it's really important that you have aligned value systems and that you respect one another. So that was my journey with SkySight. And I didn't touch on it, but somewhere in, I think it was probably around 2010, I'd gone on a trip to Dubai to go and look at some potential opportunities there. They were building the Burj Al Arab, so whenever that was, or the Burj Khalifa, sorry.
Yeah.
I actually got to go on site and walk around. It was pretty cool. But I was very impressed by how a lot of businesses there have a very tiered approach. So somebody owns a top business that owns a portion of this business, that owns a portion of this business. And often these guys are service providers to these guys. We were nothing like the scale that they were working at, but it did give me clarity on divisionalizing the business. And I think when we did that, that was when we were able to really start putting those systems in place, because we were able to say, all right, this is a skill set. So take, for example, concrete repair work. That's a specialized skill.
Yeah.
And although we had a lot of it was in-house training that we had sort of taught the guys, some of them had done formal training. It didn't make sense for those guys to go and clean windows. We could pay them a bit more because it was a skill. So we sort of divisionized the business into building building maintenance repairs.
Yep.
We had a waterproofing division. We had, so one of the things we did a lot of was working with architects and engineers to design the actual systems that the technicians would hang off of. So on a lot of the big, beautiful buildings with overhangs, you can't just go put, 12 mil anchors into the facade of their beautiful post-tension building. So we would often put these big railing systems in, and those needed certifying annually. Anything you hang on needs to be tagged, tested on an annual basis at minimum, depending how often you're using it. So that was a whole division that actually ended up growing out of that. And again, having good systems in place, we were able to build that into a really good annuity business, as with cleaning. And that was also really a big part of the shift in our business from being sort of a business that was quite reactive to a business that was a lot more strategic. Because of that whole shift, I also wanted to rebrand the company to sort of show that we had changed. And I actually did that with my wife's brother, which was a really cool project. I think it was one of the things I'm most proud of, because it really did shift and change the entire look and feel of the company. And not too long after we had done it, I did have that little moment where I pulled into the petrol station and someone said, SkySight. Yep. And I kind of cheated because we had the name and the branding, but people knew who we were, and that was a great feeling.
Yeah.
Then coming over to Adelaide, it's been fantastic. Beautiful place, beautiful people.
What made you choose Adelaide?
Sorry?
What made you choose Adelaide?
So I'm here on a 491 visa.
Okay.
So I need to be regional. Yeah. When we looked at Adelaide, we had a lot of people who were I don't want to say negative, but they weren't sort of enthused by the idea of moving to Adelaide. We actually have more family in Australia now than we do back in South Africa. So we arrived. We knew literally no one when we arrived in Adelaide. We didn't have work. So I'd sold out the business, and to be honest, I thought of maybe just taking some time off.
Yep.
As I'd said, that period in 2011 was really hard. From there, as things started to get better, and I was able to have more balance, I also actually started to train and compete in martial arts, which was something that I wanted to do for a while.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of a culmination of reaching certain goals in South Africa for business and also with that. So coming over here, we really just wanted a fresh start, fresh challenges.
Yeah.
The visa that I'm on required me to work. So I got a job just here in Lot 14 working at the Core Innovation Hub,
cool.
which is really great. It exposed me to a lot of really, really cool companies doing really great things, working in energy and resources.
Yep.
From that, I met someone who was quite keen to work with me. He quite liked some of the skills that I had. I wasn't really interested in taking on a big job then, because we were just settling and I wanted to sort of get the family going. Moved over to them in May, and that's been really fun. So it's been very flexible.
Yeah.
As I said, I'm doing quite a lot of business coaching, working with sort of smaller businesses, which is fantastic. And then as a consulting firm, the other side of us, we do obviously cybersecurity, we do managed services, but our real strength is in mixed reality, which is just it's super cool. You must know the applications are endless, and I think it's a technology that it'll continue to evolve as people start to use it. The more that they use it, the more they'll realize the applications for it.
Yeah.
So it's been really fun to do that. A lot of learning. My background is not in IT, so lots
Steep
of time.
curve.
Yeah, steep learning curve, and that's great because I think it keeps you fresh, keeps the brain going, keeps me motivated, and working with companies and seeing that transition from being a company that's not quite sure where it's going. They think they know, but they haven't quite got all the pieces of the puzzle together. Being able to work with them and see them start to get clarity on those things, starting to, even just have a shoulder to cry on, I guess, or someone to engage with. Often business leaders, it can be quite lonely in certain aspects of the work, and it can also be quite draining. So just having somebody else who's in your corner, who you can pick the phone up and go, we had this win, or we had this, I'm really struggling today. I find that really rewarding because I can relate to a lot of the issues that they bring forward. And again, I just wish when I was in their position as a younger person starting out, that I'd maybe had somebody who could have helped me learn some of the hard lessons a lot quicker. And there's nothing quite like learned experience. You can have all the theory, but until you've learned it, it's a lot harder. So being able to try and communicate that to leaders within organizations in a way that they can translate into something that's relevant to them and meaningful to them has been great. And just to see that engagement within their organizations start to build as you start to align everybody, and as everybody starts to understand what they're working towards and why they're working towards it. It's a great feeling, and I've really been enjoying that.
Wow. Yeah, now that's a great summary, Simon. It's like there's a lot to unpack there. I think in terms of, because I'm really interested in business as well, and I think some of the points you mentioned upon, such as, it's not just about, I think when a lot of people think about business, they just think about the end process where, you just hand over the cash and that's it, but a lot of work really goes behind the scenes. And so can you please provide some sort of a piece of advice for those companies that are starting out, some advice you talked about, some of the lessons that you made, that you could have known when you were younger, some advice that you could share with.
Yeah, so obviously, we've discussed the human aspect of things, and I think empathy is something that's really important. And even for somebody, so you're an engineer, or you're working on a product, you might say, well, I don't really need empathy in what I'm doing. But Dan Levy did a great presentation down at the core when I was running there. And he gave the example of a CAT scan for children. So having to go into this big, quite scary device that makes a heck of a noise for a young child is a really traumatic thing, right? But the people who had worked on the machine, they had absolutely no they had no focus on that at all. So the product that they were building and the end user that they were designing it for, it actually created an environment where it made the hospital incredibly inefficient because they had to keep cancelling because the kids were so scared inside that environment that they couldn't keep still and they couldn't actually get the end product that they were looking for. Once they had embraced it in a way that was more empathetic, they started to understand why the children were moving so much, and they started to do that research and they started to engage with them. They were then able to say, okay, well, let's change that environment. Let's create a story, or let's paint some pictures. Let's make it a game that you've got to stay still for as long as you can and get them accustomed to the noise. And suddenly when they applied these things, the experience became one that was fun for the children, and their success rate was significantly higher. The same with any organization. If you're trying to engage your staff, but you're not leading in a way that, again, going down to respect, or you're not following the values, or your values are skewed, people intrinsically will know that. And people will not follow leadership that they don't believe in. And that leadership needs to be able to clearly define the vision that you're all working towards, and then put a system. So, Google's got OKRs, and, there are all sorts of systems that you can use to try and make sure that you have that sort of waterfall approach, but you're still giving bottom-up feedback. You're making sure everybody understands what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think the why is really important as well. If I asked you to design the most perfect system but I didn't tell you what you were building. And you automated a whole process line, and you brought down the carbon emissions, and you did, something that you'd be super proud of. And I told you, well, actually what you're manufacturing is garbage that's going to go straight into the trash. You would lose that emotional attachment and that engagement to the product that you're working on. So for me, that really is what leadership, quite literally in the name, is leading.
Yeah.
So, you can think of the Pied Piper and the rats all following him. There are mechanisms that can engage your staff and engage your teams, that start top down, that embrace empathy, embrace respect, and even just from forget your internal relationships, but even just from the perspective of managing genuine relationships with clients. We are I can't remember the statistic, but I think it's something like 50% of our communication is nonverbal. If you're thinking one thing, but your body's telling something different, people pick up on it. Or if you're trying to make a quick buck, or you're not really giving the best advice to your client because you just want to make a quick sale, that will not result in a sustainable business model. And that competitor I mentioned, who was so good at branding and was a little bit unethical, his business ended up closing down. It was an Easter Friday. All his staff were rocked up on the Thursday, I think it was, to get their pay, and the doors were shut and he was gone. Over time, you might have quick wins, but that type of business model is not sustainable. And I think for you as if you're starting out within a company, be really clear on what matters to you, what you're prepared to compromise on, and what you're not. For me, and also try and find formats that you can assess that, because as with business, people change, right? So for me, a great example is I really, when I left school, thought that I was going to travel the world and shoot movies for the rest of my life. My circumstances changed. I had to reassess what I wanted, and from there I was able to adapt. But your values don't necessarily change, right? So values are things that I think, and I always, when I'm explaining this to a leadership team, you talk about your base foundation being your mission statement and your vision up at the top, and your values are what encase you getting from here to there. Without those values, everything just falls into space. Wow. So that would probably be my advice for people when it comes to the human factor is make sure you're value driven as an organization and as an individual. Make sure that you have a clear vision and that you understand how to communicate that, and then obviously the systems, as we discussed, have good systems that allow you to filter that information down, but also that allow you to move the pieces of the business as you need to, because they're clearly defined. So, if you can see that a particular operational issue is causing tension to, a sales pipeline, you can then very clearly understand what might need to change in order to adapt to whatever that circumstance is. That would probably be my, and again, you'll probably know this better than me with what you do, but the gap between operations and IT, for example, particularly in bigger organizations, manufacturing organizations, is going to become less and less. And by that, I mean, if they're not walking hand in hand and communicating with each other in a way that is really allowing that flow of information and for them to work and align. I think that's probably the word I'm looking for those two to align in a way that is really meaningful on a day-to-day, potentially hour-to-hour basis. There's going to be issues in terms of keeping up with where the leaders are going. So that's something, again, communication is critically important, and how you set that up within an organization.
Yeah, for sure. I really love that point in terms of like having empathy, and it just doesn't. It's not just limited to business and really knowing your end customers. It permeates through your personal life, your leadership skills. So definitely, I think that's something that's really, really valuable. Another thing that you touched on was the branding and having such an extensive period of your life spent in production and in film and in the film industry in South Africa. What did you learn about storytelling and branding as well? Some of the lessons about that, and why
it's a good question.
Why story is so important to us?
Branding is a story, right? I mean, you look at a Nike. I don't know how you say it here. Yeah. You already have images in your head just when I say it, right? You have perceptions around it. You have their connotations, and brands good brands are deliberate about that messaging and that story that they tell. Our story that we wanted to tell was to become seen as not just the leaders within our industry, but also to be seen as a professional organization, where we were not rocking up in an old vehicle and throwing guys out the back, and one guy's wearing this and another guy's, so we were really clinical about the story that we told. And I guess the story that we told is what people see, because what people see is what they perceive. And I mean, we talked about perception or the perceived context of South Africa to many people here. It's very much the same with brand, right? So your perceived efficiencies or effectiveness or professionalism is viewed by how you portray yourself. So we were really clinical about, we had all our guys wearing yellow overalls, and that meant up on any building, anywhere in the city, if people saw yellow overalls, they knew it was us. And by the time I left, so we had offices in Joburg as well. Certainly within Cape Town, by the time I left, you would drive down the road and you would just see yellow hanging everywhere. So we were really clinical about that, and again, it was very much a team effort. So our HR manager was really good with that. All of our clothing was branded. So whether you were in the office or whether you were outbound, you wore branded clothing. Our vehicles, we spent a lot of time and money wrapping them and putting guys hanging on the outside. And then when we rebranded, we went for a much cleaner, slicker, more sort of toned down look. With sort of a color for each of our divisions within the organization. Branding, and that branding, it's a subtle thing, and it's I can't remember who said it, but I probably heard it a number of times, but you only get your point across when you're sick of saying what you're saying. So I might say something to somebody, and this is something really important for leadership as well, to realize that their messaging, they have to keep drumming it in, because people might not hear it the first time or the second time or the third time, but the 20th time you say the same thing, it kicks in, and then there's an acknowledgement of, I understand that now. And that goes back to learning through experience versus learning through sort of academic teaching. It's a very different way of understanding something. With your branding, you just have to be consistent, and you have to just keep at it. So we had one of my mates. He kind of handled it all for us. He was really, really good, and he would just, whether it's social media or the website, or he would be putting something out consistently. And what we did was, by its nature, pretty graphic and pretty cool for storytelling, because you had, someone hanging off a 50-story building doing something that would be perceived as dangerous. And then obviously you have to back it up, right? So for a brand to be consistently acknowledged you have to make sure that you've again been clinical about your operational side of things. So for us, things like health and safety were exceptionally important. I'm very proud to say that we had very few accidents. There were some that were human errors. There was one really close near miss that fortunately didn't happen. The worst incident that we had was a car was trying to get away from the police and drove through our lock-off, and the axle caught around the rope, and the rope caught around the guy's arm. Totally out of our control. We had done everything right. They had done everything right. But if you've got people falling out the sky and you're going to clients like Growthpoint and the big banks and the big property owners in South Africa and telling them that you can provide them a service, and they see that they're not. There's no chance that you're going to get employed by them. So you need to make sure that you're ticking those boxes. If you're a service-orientated business, you don't want comebacks. So you need to understand where those come from, how you address those. Is it a training issue? Is it a tool issue? Or is it a human issue? So all of those things feed into branding. I think it's very difficult for one person or even one division to take ownership of branding, because like with everything else we've been discussing, it's about everybody working towards the same end goal. And in order for them to do that, you need to be clear about what that is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, you talked about leadership and how leadership is so instrumental into, hammering that message home and backing it up and making sure to be the individuals that are responsible of it, and make sure that everyone's coming along and working towards that vision. You did mention, that when you were starting off, you didn't actually go to university, and it was just a bit, go with the flow and learning on the job and backing it with experience. So in terms of leadership and some of the experiences that you had, how did you hone those skills, and how did you really develop it?
Through having some fairly patient partners, I think was the one. Having the initial owner of the business, Martin, was, he did a lot of EO. He taught me a fair amount in terms of some of the mechanics, not necessarily the leadership itself, but certainly the mechanics of it. And he's blossomed into, he runs so we sold off our oil and gas arm to a company called Access from Norway, and he runs the whole of the African division for them now, is quite heavily invested in it as well. He's gone on to do amazing things. But I think a lot of it was through learning hard lessons. And leadership is not something that, again, I think is taught as well as it could be. You can learn how to run the economics of a company. You can learn how to, but learning how to lead people, there's not enough formal education on that, as far as I understand, particularly from what I've seen. So you might study to be a physio, for example, but you're not taught how to generate your own business and take a team and go, I actually want to build this, this dream of mine. How do I get there? I think from potentially learning what not to do guided me to what needed to be done rather than knowing what to do. I have a very clear memory of a particular client of ours who was very involved in building big facades, and there was a really, really big project in the middle of Cape Town's foreshore CBD for the First National Bank. They were building this massive head office, moving a lot of their staff from Joburg down to Cape Town. And it was just a pure glass facade. And he was someone who was, on the surface, exceptionally successful. He had made a lot of money. He was running really big projects. And, working underneath him, we started off all fine. But then there were some issues on the project that we were, so they were installing the glass facade and we were putting the weather seal in. Just the way that they built it, they built a concrete building and then you sort of clad the outside with the aluminium, and then we came down and sealed. But we were sealing while they were building. And they, we were just contracted to do that. So that's what we did. Our management made sure people didn't get hurt and they did the job properly. Yeah. But then they started reporting that these seals were sort of having some issues with them. And we never had anything like it on any of the projects that we've done. What we ended up finding out down the road was that they had not put a cap on the top of the glazing, double glazing. So water was getting in the top, running down, and while our seals were still curing, we actually did this project in the middle of winter because the glass was getting too hot in summer. So to seal it, we wanted the conditions to be slightly cooler. So it worked out that was actually, one of the things we've been quite worried about was the heat, and we thought maybe it was actually melting the silicone while it was curing. But it turned out that they just weren't doing that one simple step. So every time it rained overnight or when the guys called off, that rain went down and literally pulled the wet silicone out of its place. It also caused some leaks on the inside, and further down the line, we found that they hadn't sealed some of the top when they had finished the building even, and that was causing water to come into the offices. The way that he dealt with those issues with me as an individual and with some of my staff it wasn't even borderline, it was completely abusive. In fact, I only have one tattoo on my body over here, and it says something along the lines of don't gain the world and lose your soul. And he was the person who motivated that tattoo. I wanted to, every morning, stand in the mirror, look at that and remind myself that I did not want to be that person. And again, everything is subjective, right? So what is your idea of success? What is my idea of success? They don't necessarily have to be the same, but by us understanding what they are, we can then get there. That again, and I think I've mentioned that leadership style was quite common within the industry. But experiencing it myself made me realize that if I spoke to my staff that way, and I never got even close to how he treated both me and some of my staff. But if I treated them that way, they would feel about me the way I felt about him. And that would not get them respect. Or it would not get me their respect. And like we discussed earlier, you don't have to like somebody to respect them, but you probably will. And if you like somebody or if you respect somebody, you're more likely to go the extra mile and to have that invested engagement in whatever it is that you're working towards. So that was a really, and again, it goes back to empathy, but it was a really strong learning moment for me in terms of going, how do we make sure that the way that we engage with our staff is not just respectful because it's the right thing to do, but because it's actually what is going to give us better results. So that was one big lesson, and the other lesson I think was really just about making sure you have those systems in place that allow the business to take care of itself. So, I know there's a big push who, not what in business at the moment. And I agree with it 100%. If you've got the right person and you give them an environment to thrive, they will do that. But if you give them an environment to thrive with systems in which to do it, they will. And you don't have to tell them what the system is. You just need to tell them how that system gets you from A to B. So there's a flexible balance that you need to have between having systems that allow for a structured organization, but then also providing freedom for people to continuously improve on that. And to be able to provide their input, because if you're not getting feedback from bottom up or laterally, you're losing probably 90% of your surface area as an organization, particularly if you're a highly staffed business. Guys out on site see things that you don't see, and they can help you solve problems that you don't even know exist. So creating an environment for that, I think, is also really important, and giving them the freedom to feel that they can bring those things, those suggestions forward in a place where it'll be respected and dealt with in a way that that either rewards that type of behavior or at minimum doesn't push it down or shove it down or make them feel inferior or that it's not their place to and again, they're mechanisms, and this is why you need systems, because you can't have every single person picking up the phone and dialing the CEO of BHP because he's quite busy doing other stuff. But you need to have systems that report up and flow up and down as well. So that was the other big lesson that we learned. And again, that moving of the business into the clearly defined organizational structures, or what we call divisions, allowed us to become more focused within those divisions. So it allowed our labor to be a lot more specialized. It allowed our quoting systems to become a lot more specialized. Even our client retention systems, annuity work strategy just became a lot more honed in, because you had somebody whose main focus was just that. So, to any business that's growing, I think what they do need to do is look at how you can bite-size your business into portions that can be managed by other people. In as much as possible, or by systems, or by automation, or by any of the big topic at the moment is sort of that trilogy of industrialization. So AI and all the promise that brings along with automation. You still have a human factor, so balancing that all out, and it's going to be really interesting to see. I mean, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but we're in a time that's really exciting, but also going to bring some challenges. So, something that I'm really conscious of is when working with companies and we're talking about this vision and we're talking about this purpose that they're working towards, and you can see how engaged people get towards it, makes me start to think, well, when we have Maximus Prime walking around at $50,000 by 2030 or whatever it is that they claim they'll have it, and you're no longer being served by a human at a restaurant, or being able to drive your own vehicle, or how purposeful will our lives be? I expect within our lifetime we'll see a basic income grant being implemented because of the potential loss of jobs. And again, it just depends how much companies choose to adopt these things. But I see it a bit like a snowball that's already in motion, and stopping it, I think, is, unless there's something catastrophic that happens, I just see it starting to pick up momentum, if nothing, certainly not slow down. So that creates a really interesting dynamic in terms of how do people then, if you don't have a job, and where do we find purpose? And working with Microsoft in what we do now, something that they're talking about a lot is well, actually, it'll give people room to be a lot more creative, and to add certain things to augment that type of lifestyle that we'll be leading. And I'd like to be positive about it and think that that's probably, hopefully, where we'll be. But there are going to be some really interesting social, philosophical challenges coming up that I think it'll be interesting to see where we land and how we deal with those, to make sure that people have that purpose and that drive. Social media has already proven to have a massive effect on people in terms of their mental health, things like anxiety. Earlier when we were talking about me being at school, and I was kind of remembering back, it was such a different world then. We didn't have cell phones. By choice, my parents didn't have a TV for the first, couple of years of my life. So we really were quite isolated in terms of our access to the information, and one might almost say bombarded with it now. I think it's going to be very interesting to see where things land.
Does that kind of scare you, or not knowing where it's going to end up?
No, I mean, humans have been through this, right? We're a super adaptable species. It's our superpower, really. I would like to, as I said, I'd like to be positive in terms of, I normally am a glass half full person, although my wife might tell you something different. but I think that if we play it right, we can use it to address a lot of the challenges that we have. And it certainly will be a different way of living. I'm quite excited to see where it goes on the one side. And on the other side, I don't think fearful is the right word. But there are definitely some concerns that I have for and I guess maybe they're concerns about humanity remaining how it is now. So what do we lose, and what does that mean? As we've already got Neuralink, and we've got so those mechanisms. If somebody loses their leg and they get a prosthesis, we go, that's amazing. They can walk now, and they can. But what happens when someone chooses to chop their leg off because they want the prosthesis, because it makes them run faster or jump higher or be more efficient in combat or whatever it might be? Those are questions that I think we'll start to see arise, and it's it's going to be a very different world.
And I think with any sort of change, I think the biggest thing is awareness, and knowing that we're going to have these challenges. And I think having conversation is where we really start to begin and addressing some of these things, and as a result of that, putting action, implementing it, and really figuring out the answers to some of these challenges that is on the very near horizon. It's already some aspects of these technologies that we talked about are pretty much here.
They're here,
and it's changing. Even with my experience, I think when I was in high school and not necessarily having phones and whatnot, and now I see my nieces and nephews having these iPads and so forth. It is kind of the world is for sure changing, and I think it always, I think, comes back to how we, implement and use it. I think we can either live cohesively with it, or, if we're not necessarily responsible, it becomes a bit more challenging. And social media is one of those examples where you can have negative impacts, but it has a positive impact as well. I think it just depends on our usage of this, for sure. So
just quickly to touch on that. So I think sort of just thinking about it while you were saying those things. It is also our humanness that, so that humanness that I'm scared that we might lose. This sort of discussion actually is almost like the antidote to the I'm in gym and I happen to have my shirt off and I'm flexing and I'm also taking a photograph and posting it on Instagram type post that's out there. There's a lot of content like that, but this sort of genuine conversation is really going to the humanity and going to sort of real issues and talking about things that matter. As long as we keep that, I think we will be able to navigate it in a way that is responsible. And as we discussed before, my vision is not the same as your vision. The things I'm prepared to compromise on are not the same as what you might be prepared to compromise on. And that will change for humanity over a period of time. And again, it goes to leadership. And it is one of the other concerns I have is the quality of leadership that we have coming from a country where, we had this beautiful leader in Nelson Mandela. And then lately we've had some not so great leadership, and you can see how that affects a country. We have some issues on the horizon in terms of leadership in some of the biggest countries in the world. We've been through some of them already. We've got a lot going on. So that leadership and those values and trying to instill values in everybody that are in the best interests of everybody. And not necessarily compromising certain people or certain environments, is going to become challenging because people, certain people, I think, will start to get significantly more power. So why would somebody who sends rockets to space and builds electric vehicles set up a fund, a massive, monstrous fund to fund politicians, right? Like, there's something going on there. Why would he buy the biggest, the biggest, what was the big or a very big social media platform that has massive influence all across the world? Those sorts of things, I don't say they keep me up at night, but if we're not socially all aware of these things and discussing them and making sure that people around us are aware of them, we might be quite vulnerable to certain things over time.
Yeah. And no, for sure, definitely. I think there is that risk to it, even though that, people are more and more connected, that there is that risk of not necessarily understanding the bigger issues that, we have in society. And I think we're going in a direction where it's all about those clickbaits and, short attention span. And maybe that's why it's people don't have the attention span to really, listen and get the other perspective from the other side. And I think that's something that we really enjoy and really take pride in, the fact that, we do these, long form kind of media and really be able to have a discussion in a long form and to be able to really iron out the issues and, or the topic that it is that we're really talking about. So I think that's something is definitely a challenge. And, we are doing our bit here at the Noor Podcast to really help in that aspect. And, we've really, really learned a lot, and I know we're a bit short on time, but I think, you mentioned on leadership and Nelson Mandela, and I think, the time that you grew up on, in the time that you grew up in, was a time of apartheid, and I just wanted to briefly touch on it, if you could.
Yeah, so,
and how did that inform your perspective, that social change and something that we can learn to this day?
Oh, there's loads people can learn from apartheid, as there's loads we could learn from, many of the terrible regimes that have been implemented over the years of humanity. So apartheid, quite literally translated from Afrikaans to English, means separated.
Yep.
They were of the opinion that black people should live where black people should live, white people get to live where they wanted to live, and coloured and Indian people were they were also moved out from where they. So if you can imagine, you grew up in your family home, and I talk so fondly about mine, and someone comes in with guns and says, "Sorry, you've got to move," and they take you somewhere where there is no gainful employment. You're not even allowed into the city without a tag. And bear in mind, this at its height was not in my lifetime. So this was before I was born. I remember my father hiding. I want to say this, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily 100% true, because when I was young, I did have a bit of a blur between reality and storytelling. I feel like my father used to hide from the government because they had a recruitment policy for the army. So they required that you would do a certain amount of time within the army, and he wasn't on board with what the army was doing. And I seem to vaguely remember that, but maybe it was a story I was told from before when he was younger. I can't quite remember. But there were little things like that. So like I said, I was super lucky to go to a school like Marist Brothers, where one of my best friends was a guy called Fezile Mpahlwa, who lived in what was an informal settlement originally. He had a home that was a house. His dad drove a car, it's one of those places where I actually remember going and sleeping over at his house, and we went and played football. Had sort of like a little patch outside, and I don't think I would let my kids go there now and do it, but my parents, they did. They obviously understood the relevance of it from a social perspective. And the kids that I was just hanging out with my mate and going and playing, and you're a kid, you don't think about these things really. And again, we were just kids growing up together and hanging out. Now when I think back, I remember that we were playing football, and I was obviously the only white kid there, and a lot of the kids came up and they started sort of touching my hair and touching me, and I just thought it was a bit strange, and they obviously were very friendly. Now I realize it's because they've probably never seen a white kid before in their lives. And we were 8, 9 years old. So you have little things that hint to where we were, but for me, and I was privileged to be on a side that was not as poorly impacted by apartheid as the rest of the country. I didn't really feel it. I didn't, you know, it was, and I had that real privilege of being able to, and again, I applaud my parents for putting us into that environment, where I was able to engage with people from different races and learn about their culture. And obviously it was snippeted and it was small. They were the privileged few who could travel for an hour and a half or however long it took them to get from where they lived to where the school was. But the real impact of apartheid was that by secluding and giving them both education and opportunities that were, you know, just really not viable for basic human dignity, created a massive divide between haves and have-nots. And when you have that, and people are desperate, and people don't have purpose, and people don't have basic, you know, how would you feel if you couldn't feed your kid? It leads to things like crime, and it leads to things like people being abused, potentially, you know, just in terms of the cost of wages in South Africa now. So in South Africa now, a moderately skilled person probably earns less than my son earns chopping fruit down at Caruso's in JD Road. And he's 16, you know. So those are things that apartheid did all the way back then, a lifetime ago for me. And I'm not a spring chicken, although I still feel pretty young. But the impacts of it are still being felt, you know. And it'll take generations to work through that. And the pain is still really real there for a lot of people, you know. But again, I go back to the beauty of South Africa, and that is that people there, for the most part, are very embracing and forgiving. And, you know, you look at conflict like Israel and Palestine, and I definitely do not want to get into discussing that. But there you have, you killed my son, I'm killing your father, and it's this vicious cycle that you'll never get out of. Whereas having a strong leader like Nelson Mandela, who was able to say, I forgive you, I'm not going to forget it. There's hard work to be done. Galvanized and created that dream of the Rainbow Nation. You know, you talk about branding. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant at it. He got buy-in from international countries. He got buy-in from the South Africans. Unfortunately, the hard work that followed lost momentum along the way in certain instances. But there are very few countries in the world where people would have reacted the way that South Africans did. And by South Africans, I mean the vast majority of South Africans who were impacted by apartheid in a very negative way. And again, it's why, you know, I can't bring myself to say anything bad about the country, because it's beautiful. The people are beautiful. You know, there's an African thing called Ubuntu, which is I am you, you are me. And they, you know, you see it. So working particularly with the staff that I used to work with, you get to see a lot of the way in which they help one another. You know, if one, so in informal settlements or even in, you know, environments where people are living in close proximity to one another, if there's a fire there, it's a big deal because it spreads really, really quickly, and some of them don't have electricity. So to heat your food, you use gas, and maybe you forget to turn it off, or your kid's trying to cook it because you're at work till 8 o'clock at night, and they make a mistake. But these fires would be quite commonplace, and you know. Our HR manager, again, was amazing. She would hear about it through the grapevine, and she would get on the phone and everybody would know, and suddenly there would be guys rocking up with clothes and food and furniture, and you know, it's not unique to South Africa in any way, but it's not the perception I think that a lot of people have of South Africa, and to me that's quite sad. You know, recently we were lucky enough to go and watch the Soweto Gospel Choir up at the Fringe. And we took my daughter along. There was a DJ who was kind of playing house music with them singing along. Unless you've experienced and felt that energy of of the African culture, and the song and the music really brings it across. It's hard to explain it to people. So you know, I find it difficult to talk about apartheid because I don't have a lot of personal experience in it. I know in 1994 we came exceptionally close to civil war in South Africa, and then just before we left, there were riots in Durban, and that was really sad. And again, it's you know, some people might say you can't make excuses for that type of behavior, but the riots in Durban were scary. I mean, lots of people decided to leave after that. Cape Town wasn't touched by it, Joburg hardly touched by it, but Durban was really scary. And you know, so the effects of apartheid will be felt, as I said, within our generation and within generations to come, because it was just so effective and efficient. So the actual system itself, I was not really around to see implemented, just the after effects of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. That's
cool.
All. I know it's a quite sensitive topic, but really to learn a lot. I think we're wrapping up, but we often like to ask our guests, you know, one final question, and it's, you know, who has been? You've had an incredible life. And I guess, you know, who has been a role model for you that you've looked up to, and, you know, some of the challenges that you may have experienced. Someone local in your life. Often people say Mandela and Gandhi, but
no, I didn't know Mandela. I have a ton of respect for the man and what he did. I'm probably going to throw something left field here, but I would say probably, I mean, obviously my parents and my family had a very big impact on me and who I am. You know, my grandparents on both sides, for different reasons and different skill sets, were hugely impactful on my life. I'm probably going to say that my wife is my biggest role model. If I think about it, she's a person who kind of consistently is just always supportive. She's super strong. She's exceptionally accomplished, and she gave up a lot for me to be able to do a lot of things. You know, like I said, in 2011, 12, I was working crazy hours. I was not terribly healthy in a lot of ways. And she stood by me and supported me and helped me through those times. When I got it in my head that I wanted to take kickboxing to a world championship level, she stood by me and let me train 6 days a week and fly to New York and Miami and other places and go and compete. And she let me get that out of my system. And you know, it, to be honest, was probably in a lot of ways some of the things that I've done are quite selfish. And at the time, you think you're doing it for your family or you're doing it for other reasons. But she's always stood by me. And she's just been an amazing leader for our family as well. When I've been absent, she's been around. You know, now it's great because with her being here and the kids having so much more freedom. So, you know, in South Africa, kids, you drive them around because public transport doesn't quite work as well as it should, and it's not always that safe. Whereas now, you know, she's at an awards dinner and my kids are at home and we're not worried about it, which probably sounds strange to you, but where we come from, it's different. So being able to see her now take on a real big career and put herself into that is really rewarding. And yeah, she's just you know, she's my person. So and she's made you know, I think a lot of people have the last thing I'll say is I think that a lot of people have a perception that relationships have to be hard, particularly the sort of the romantic relationships, because that creates that sort of that Italian energy that you think of. But it's never been like that with her. You know, we've got certainly there's energy there. But it's despite having a lot of difficult times, it's been easy and a pleasure and a real privilege. So that would probably be my answer to that one. Probably not what you're expecting.
No. I love that. Yeah, it's really good. No worries. Thank you so much, Simon, for being here.
Cool.
We really learned a lot, and I think the audience can really take a lot out of it in terms of leadership. Some of the experiences that you had and some of the advice that you provided was definitely really, really valuable. So we really appreciate you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, and keep it up.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Cool, man.
Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah.